Well, this town, it don't got much to see, but they light it up at night just like it's Nashville, Tennessee. And the boys out on the bluff are getting drunk enough to see. One swore that he saw Jesus in the trees. It brought him to his knees.
Hello and welcome to the Bluefish Astrology YouTube channel. I'm Lily Walker, and today I'm here to offer a presentation on the more philosophical and religious studies themes that this channel has been talking about and broadcasting about for since its inception. And I'm going to start, and I haven't done that in a long time. I've been doing astrology videos lately, and then I also wrote a zine, but I haven't really done a philosophy sort of presentation in a long time. So this is kind of summing up a lot of things I've been thinking about and working on, in my own sort of thing for the past couple of years. And so I want to say first, though, that I'm having a lot of trouble finding the voice for this presentation and for the channel in general, to be honest, because the people I love and who I see every day in my world, my community members, my friends, even people I encounter by and large on social media, are not interested in this topic. And they aren't willing to give me the amount of time and concentration necessary in order to grok what it is I'm saying. And honestly, they don't really care all that much. And that's totally fine, right? It's just, I don't want to waste my breath, right? So, and also I want to talk to the people in my world. So I've been really trying to, shift the voice around to try to find a voice that carries a bit. And so the astrology is good for that, right? That's why you've been seeing more astrology videos on the channel, because at least I can get people to maybe listen to something of that, like that, because they can immediately kind of understand it and put it to use for their own lives. However, this topic, Neoplatonism, cosmology, the arising of reality and our place in it and this sort of thing, and how that's related to the magical worldview and how that's ultimately geocentric. This is a hard sell for people. Now, not only is it a hard sell for my friends and family, it's even a hard sell for my fellow astrologers, except for a few, very few. They're not seeing this or worried about it. And then Algis speaks to this in the book. And then in addition, I think it's just a really difficult topic. Okay. And I am also just an amateur fisherman over here, with very few credentials. And so who would listen to me? But at the same time, as a friend of mine reminded me last night, that there are a few people out there that are interested in this, and that they come to the table ready to process the information. And so so with that in mind, I'm going to share a few things that I think are super fascinating. And here I am, and it's largely related to this book, Hermes Trismegistus, The Way of Wisdom. But it's also going to have a little bit from Cosmos and Psyche, and it's going to have quite a bit from Peter Kingsley, Ancient Philosophy, Mystery, and Magic. So with that, let me share the screen here and get you the presentation. Okay, so this presentation is called Cosmology and the Magical Worldview. And it's kind of going back to the zine that I wrote called The Magical Worldview, and revisiting some topics from there and bringing up this book and this section in here called The Astrological Model of the World, that starts on page 22, and using this as a second champion for the theories and the whatever it is that I put forward in the magical worldview. And also revisiting the first champion I had put forward and kind of clarifying some of that information via video, because the writing's not super clear. Peter Kingsley. Okay, so I'm going to bring up two champions today. I'm going to bring out two champions for the magical worldview. And so the magical worldview, or sort of my obsession here on the channel since the very inception of the channel, has been the image of cosmic arising or cosmogenesis and our place in it, and how that happens moment by moment, arising from the subterranean realm, of the underworld and like the Sambhogakaya up, arising from the underworld across the liminal threshold in the heart and out into being, heartbeat by heartbeat. And our relationship to the living animate cosmos that surrounds us, and also like our participation in this symbiosis as if it's a dance with the beloved, within this landscape of cosmic arising, and also our participation insofar as it affects the process of transfiguration. And it is my assertion, and I say this clearly in the magical worldview, that the key to embodying the magical worldview is a geocentric view, is geocentric cosmology. And in this section, Algis says as much, although, one would wish that he were more direct in saying it. He gets a very good roast going. And so we're going to talk about that. Okay, so the beginning of this section here that we're going to talk about on page 22, the first thing that Algis tells us is that there are a number of different lineages related to Hermes, but that the one, I guess he says the one that's most popular, I don't know, but he just says that that in the Middle Ages that this lineage is understood to relate to Enoch, Noah, and Hermes Mercurius triplets, an Egyptian king, philosopher, and prophet who ruled Egypt after the Great Flood. And that this later Hermes, Egyptian king Hermes, is unanimously associated with alchemy and talismanic magic. And so I just want to kind of talk about that for half a second to say that what I see in that is that from Enoch is where we get the angelic hierarchies that are so popular in theosophy and anthroposophy and bluefish astrology. I don't know. So, these angelic hierarchies are very popular, the ascended masters and this sort of thing. And those are coming from Enoch. And then we have Noah, who is the ancestor who survived the flood. This is the Atlantean ancestor. And I believe his name starts with a D in a lot of the Mesopotamian literature. And he's the one that, say, Gilgamesh goes to visit, that gives him the elixir of immortality to bring back his best friend, but he loses it to the snake and all of that. So he goes across to visit the Atlantean ancestor. This is Noah, the Atlantean ancestor. And then Hermes Mercurius triplets, or this Egyptian king, is Moses, but it's also Sargon. So there's a distinction made, and Algis speaks to the distinction between Moses and Sargon, though he doesn't, point at these things completely directly, but he does speak to it. And so, both Moses and Sargon have the same story. They were put in a basket, they were floated down the river, they were adopted by a king and made, to rule and this sort of thing. Now, Sargon, we are told, was the last great Mesopotamian king. He was the last one that Oannes, the Atlantean ancestor fish form, came to visit. And so, and then his daughter Eduana also was a pure soul. But then we see the schism come in with the brother and the nation builders starting to use religion to justify their aims and to nation build. So they stop following the eagle of the signs, and in the signs they start seeing their ego, they follow their ego instead of the eagle. So when the sign arises, they're like, I don't really like that sign. I'm going to do what I want to do, and this sort of thing. They stop listening to what God's saying and how the eagle's directing them and start doing what they want to do. And so there's that schism that happens there with the king of Sargon and his daughter Eduana. So from right here, from the very beginning, I feel like that Algis is very clearly pointing to the bluefish, Oannes, with this lineage. And so it just made me smile. And because the magical worldview opens with the story of Oannes. So yes, so then the second thing that he begins to tell us is that this body of literature, that Hermes, Hermetic literature, is censored, and it's powerful, and it's suspicious to, you know, early Christians and this sort of thing, and the Roman emperors, and it gets censored along with the Neoplatonic Academy and stamped out. Well, but then begins to resurface after the fall of Constantinople, as we know, and in Rome, and Cosmo de' Medici and Ficino translating, right? And so, but what Algis points out very clearly right here is where he starts to call BS, okay? So he says that in the translation, in this moment where the Neoplatonic teachings are resurfaced in the Renaissance, that something happened. And what happened, that was a schism. And what happened there, that schism, was the artificial definition or separation into two, division of theurgy and the theurgic philosophy and magic. And they divided theurgy into two different forms of magic, one philosophical magic and the other practical applied magic. And they called the practical applied magic black magic and the philosophical magic theurgy. And so that was artificial, and that Algis says that Iamblichus would have thrown a fit at this point, and that he would have totally disagreed with that fundamentally, as do I, as does anyone who actually understands the Neoplatonic teachings, because that's dualism. Like they and also, you know, to say that our philosophy doesn't have an effect on the external world, yeah, that's wrong. It does. Like, that's the ultimate aim. And so he begins to speak to this, and I'll get onto it to make it more clear. But Iamblichus would argue with this from the beginning. Those are not separate, and you can't separate ritualistic practical magic and actually doing what you think, right? Like, you think it and then you do it and you apply it, right? There's two pieces, and it's, you know, you have to do both in order to accomplish the aim. And so, however, in the Renaissance, there was this artificial distinction. And this is because of the onset of enlightenment, as we'll get on to looking at. And there are three different things that happened right there in that moment. One, the enlightenment and the disenchantment of the cosmos and the establishment of the Cartesian rational viewpoint, which was of duality. Two, Copernicus and the Copernican revolution and the unseating of the sun from the hearth. So that happened in that moment. And three, this division into two different camps of magic, which philosophical magic and applied practical magic. Now, I was going to say that there's a video on this channel called Getting Real with Bluefish, on Bluefish. And I kind of go on a rant about what happened in the Renaissance that started to create rock stars, because I could see that something happened there when we moved from the craft guild of artists kind of thing into modernity, where we've got these rock stars, right? And my question was, what happened to the Hermetic or the spiritual path of the Chela? What was misunderstood that suddenly started producing rock stars again? Okay, so I'm going to come back to this last quote a little after we talk about the next few slides, because I think it makes sense and helps people to understand it better if you understand the next couple of slides. So, where's my thing? Okay, so here we have, I'm just going to leave it small so that way it's easier to shuffle between the signs and you can also see the writing. But here what we have are images from Richard Tarnus's Cosmos and Psyche, and the words on these images and the images themselves are taken verbatim from Richard Tarnus. So, and basically what he's illustrating here is worldview, okay? So he says that here in this purple image, we have the primal worldview. And in this primal worldview, intelligence and soul pervade all of nature and the cosmos, and a permeable human self directly participates in that larger matrix of meaning and purpose in which it is embedded. Okay, so this primal worldview is called animism, And that's kind of was a pejorative term when I was getting my degree in religious studies. At least I hear from certain people that it's starting to become in vogue again, and that's actually very true. So in the upper echelons, this animist worldview of animism is starting to catch a bit again, and may not be spoken to quite so pejoratively in the discipline of religious studies anymore, because it's coming back with metamodernism. But at the same time, in the olden days, it was considered to be pejorative, and this idea that trees could talk, or that rocks had a consciousness, or like crystals, right? Had a consciousness, or had something ensouled about them that that was separate from the soul of the human, or independently functioned, and there was a relationship between the two, that one wasn't lord over the other, and the other inanimate, this sort of thing. And so this is the primal worldview that we were kind of encompassed in a conversation that was bifurcated, like it went two different, we were both talking. And so in the modern worldview, however, all qualities associated with purposeful intelligence and soul are exclusively a characteristic of the human subject, which is radically distinct from the non-human world. So this is Cartesian rationalism, right? I think, therefore I am. The rock doesn't think, therefore it is not. The tree does not think, therefore it is not, right? These humans have this consciousness capacity to think, reason, and use morality, these sorts of things. So that is what creates beingness, right? And these other things are just objects that beingness experiences and uses as tools. Okay. And so we have a very thick boundary of skin in between our internal world and our external reality in the modern worldview. So in the evolution from the primal worldview to the modern, the human self has been radically differentiated from the world, and the ground of meaning and purposeful intelligence has been relocated from a now disenchanted cosmos to an autonomous human self. So everything spiritual in the world has been mushed onto the inside of the human, and our psychology, and our internal process, and all of these things. We can have really big feels, but we really need to check our rationality, and what's really happening might not be what those feels. You know what I mean? This sort of thing. So this is the modern worldview. Now, Tarnus also has one image that I don't have that I didn't redraw. I probably should, which is the more modern worldview, which has the self as this tiny little blue bubble in an absolutely huge cosmos devoid of meaning, right? It's a bunch of rocks, and that space is just, as we find out more and more and more, that space is just getting bigger and bigger. And our sense of effect in that huge schema is growing smaller and smaller and smaller, and in this sense. And so that we become a speck of dust in the wind, that really, and all these ideas of absurdity and the stranger, that, it doesn't matter if you kill the Arab or whatever, like it's the same as not killing them or whatever. All these sorts of things start to come up because, it's like nothing has any meaning anymore. And so that's kind of like the self in the small little bubble of blue in this extremely vast cosmos that is disenchanted and devoid of meaning. Now, the transcendent divine worldview is like the religious worldview that developed in Western society. But, so this worldview also reminds me a lot of Mother Mary, when Mother Mary becomes the female archetype, and she's just like a ghost. And she is so polite and so wholesome and sweet and quiet, keep sweet and obey. And that Mother Mary is like this, instead of being a real woman with, blood and guts and anger and ability to do and move things, like an embodied feminine archetype. So anyway, but that's a bit of a side hustle. So I do have some quotes here from Tarnus, and I hesitate to read like all of it word verbatim, but at the same time, it's pretty hard to paraphrase Tarnus. And so what he says here is that the disenchanted cosmos impoverishes the collective psyche in the most global way, vitilating its spiritual and moral imagination. Vitilate, not only in the sense of diminish and impair, but also in the sense of deform and debase. In such a context, everything can be appropriated. Nothing is immune. Majestic vistas of nature, great works of art, revered music, eloquent language, the beauty of the human body, distant lands and cultures, extraordinary moments of history, arousal of deep human emotion, all become advertising tools to manipulate consumer response. And then, for quite literally, in a disenchanted cosmos, nothing is sacred. The soul of the world has been extinguished. Ancient trees and forests can then be seen as nothing but potential lumber. Mountains, nothing but mineral deposits. Seashores and deserts are oil reserves. Lakes and rivers, engineering tools. Animals perceived as harvestable commodities, not spirit guides. Harvestable commodities. Indigenous tribes as obstructing relics of an outmolded past. Children's minds as marketing targets. At the important cosmological level, the spiritual dimension of the empirical universe has been entirely negated, and with it, any publicly affirmable encompassing ground for moral wisdom and restraint. And so with this quote, the byproduct of this quote is that what he's pointing out is that by returning to the view of a holistic animated consciousness, maybe hitting all three of those points that went askew in the Renaissance, that it creates a sense of effect again. It pulls us back from this spiraling nothingness of a dust in the wind back to the throne seat of center in the hearth and ability to do something about it. It puts the power back into our hands, and so suddenly we're able to become stewards of the environment and the earth again. Right? And so that's really important. It's perhaps the best reason anyone has said for why to do this. The most practical reason why we need to be preaching this, is those 3 points, that if we were to reverse course on those 3 points, that it would create an increased ability to steward the earth, which is our job as humans. So, and then he says, for as we gaze out now at the immense starry heavens surrounding our precious planet, and as we contemplate the long and richly diverse history of human thinking about the world, must we not consider that in our strangely unique modern commitment to restrict all meaning and purposeful intelligence to ourselves, and refusing these to the great cosmos within which we have emerged, that we might in fact drastically be underestimating and misperceiving the cosmos as well? Perhaps the greater Copernican revolution is in a sense still incomplete. Ba-da-bom. Still unfolding. Perhaps a long hidden form of anthropocentric bias, increasingly destructive in its consequences, can now at last be recognized. That's opening up a possibility of a richer, more complex, authentic relationship between the human being and the cosmos. So although Tarnus does not go full geocentrism, I'm okay with that. I can get to that. Although he doesn't go full, he does say that if we can return to this, if we can return something, then we can, get back on track. And basically what he's speaking to is one of the 3 things that went askew in the Renaissance. 1, natural and practical magic division. Nope, he's not speaking to that. The Cartesian divide of the soul being on the inside and objects on the outside that we're scientifically processing, trying to understand, but that consciousness is on the inside. If we can fix that, that's what he's saying. He's saying, we got to get out of that dualism of consciousness. And then the third thing that went wrong was the cosmology. So all 3 of those are connected. Anyway, okay, so let's go back up to this quote here now and say, the aim of philosophical Hermeticism is to surpass the material psychosomatic domain. while the aim of alchemical and magical Hermeticism, if we find this division of terms acceptable, is to scientifically rearrange the destiny, control the domain, and use it for positive purposes. Okay, so basically what he's saying that is that this philosophical Hermeticism, that it's basically that Western transcendent worldview, that it's that we apply this pristine wisdom and knowledge, and we use these elements that correspond to our ideas as medicines and things to bolster human performance and create great works of art, temper our humors, and create great works of art. This image, it's very much like this image. So the aim of this new theurgy, the philosophical, is to affect this sort of movement. Okay. Now, maybe Plotinus would have agreed with that if because the soul doesn't fully descend, but Iamblichus would not, and non-duality would not. So that's kind of that part. Now, this further quote that we've got from, let's see if I can do this. Yeah. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. Okay. So this further quote that we have, this is from the Algis thing. So Moses teaches, and this is speaking to the distinction between Moses and Sargon. Okay. So Moses' teaching and the Egyptian doctrine of creation of the cosmos are different in terms of the treatment of the human being. Adam is not a slave made from earthly dust. Instead, he's a divine being belonging to the world of stars. He is a brother and the son of God, or the demiurgical word. His downfall is merely a descent into the material realm governed by planets, as well as a division into two opposite genders, as written in Plato's Symposium. So in other words, what's being said here is that there is no original sin in Hermeticism. Okay. So, and that's a big distinction between Moses and the, teachings of the Christian church and the teachings of Hermeticism. And so in the teachings of the church, we have fallen into this fallen realm, right? And it's, and that we are sinners by nature. But the Hermetic view is that we have descended into this realm. However, we have a power to recover our original nature, which is good, right? Like we've taken on a cloak, but we can clean it off of us. Okay. So we are not essentially fallen. Okay. And so, and there's something that we can do, both can do and have to do in order to rectify our state, right? That we actually have to rely on theurgic magic in order to, that's theurgy is soul salvation, right? It's salvation. So there's something that we have to do in order to gain that salvation. Okay. And so there's like a distinction there. And so then, he goes on to say, so apparently Ficino was and the Symposium both speaking to this cosmology of the Poimandres or whatever. And this is a Wikipedia quote about what that is. And so the Poimandres describes a creation story where the singular divine mind, Nous, first breathes a second craftsman mind, which then creates the cosmos through a series of 7 governors that circle the material world. Humans created in the image of the divine mind possess a spark of the divine, but can become entangled in the material desires and illusions. Salvation lies in rejecting the bodily passions, recognizing one's divine nature, and ascending through the cosmic layers to reunite with the divine. I would say that differently. I would say, and potentially ascending through the cosmic layers to realize the divine where we are. But I would argue with the fact that we're going anywhere. The ascension seems to say to me that we're leaving this space, or that we're going somewhere. We are not going anywhere. It's just becoming more clear around us. So, but the point is here, though, that and this is a lot like the cosmology of the Timaeus. It speaks of I speak to that quite a bit in the Magical Worldview and describe the cosmology of the Timaeus. Interestingly, what I come up with differs very much from the academic view that's been published in the Timaeus by the professors. But they don't see why they're wrong. They probably won't for another 10 to 15 years. but they are wrong. But anyway, the point is that according to Ficino, the human being can defy the power of the seven governors. This is a quote from Algis, and that rule the physical domain, because the human intellect, which reflects wholeness of the divine intellect, is not subject to nature. Nature itself is a mirror reflection of the higher reality. Like that. Good sentence. And that is why the understanding of sympathetic and anagogic structure of this image allows us to change the composition elements of both the physical and psychological worlds to improve or worsen their state, right? This is, Henry Corbin, Tawil, Avicenna, all of this, very much. It's exactly what they're saying. So just basically, I guess that I'm trying to speak to the Transfiguration here. I think that's probably the most heady nugget of the whole Neoplatonist kind of path and topics is the Transfiguration. And maybe I'm going to write about that more in the future. But at this point, it's just, my point here is mostly saying that the artificial distinction between philosophical and practical magic is arbitrary and wrong, because we can't affect the Transfiguration without being able to actually do stuff to the outside world, right? We're totally doing that. So that's why, when I joke about reading the intros to the astrology books that tell us how to jump through red tape and hoops in order to survive as an astrologer under the orthodoxy, I already see I can't, because I'm basically, I know what those hoops are. I don't agree with those hoops. And Algis is saying right here that he doesn't, that those Iamblichus doesn't either. Okay. So then what does Algis do, right? Okay, so I'm sorry, stick with me here, because I swear to goodness that I don't think you're good. Well, okay, I swear to goodness this is going to be good. How about put it that way? So, okay, so here we're going to go back to this. And like Algis, what does he do from here? He begins to describe the arising of cosmology and the way that it looks, and that astrologers know how it looks, and he goes on and he even describes it by the Egyptian decans, and it's really actually really cool what he does here. But I'll read this part of the quote, and he says that the Renaissance image magic requires a certain model of the world in which cosmic absoluteness arising from the one is imagined as an orb, divided into strata and sections. The geometric construction of this absoluteness is identical to the astronomical construction of the material universe. In other words, if we were to take our astrology chart off the page and see it in the sky, that this is identical. This image is identical. Geocentric image is identical to the astronomical construction of the material universe. By example, Ptolemy, Plato, and Aristotle, by example of Ptolemy, Plato, and Aristotle, the latter is depicted as a hierarchy of 7 planets crowded with the firmament of attached stars. Beyond it, there lies a metaphysical prototypes and divine archetypes. The earth exists in the center of this imaginary orb, which is permeated by multifaceted stream of divine influences. The stream itself is filtered and partly transformed by the screen of each planetary sphere. So the moon cave, the movie that we see on the moon cave, is partly transformed by the screen of each planet reflecting on it. The stream itself, planetary sphere ruled by its respective god, daemon, and servants. The world of archetypes is arranged in a circle articulated by the system of astrological signs. As long as this spiritual schema is not ruined by a new cosmology, it functions as an objective projection of the imagination covering the whole material reality. How do contemporary astrologers manage to transfer this, both mythical and cosmological calendrical model, into the astronomical post-Descartes space and explain it as an action of inanimate material bodies? This is a mystery that can be solved only by an experienced political demagogue who knows that human stupidity and gullibility are infinite. So, and I'll just go ahead and say the last part. In this way, vague suspicions and the desire to experience the tangible effect of providence are expressed in the language of aesthetic psychological syncretisms, which attempts to lean towards a materialist cosmology. That is such a roast, but like so few people like understand what he's saying there, but that is such a roast. Like he has totally leveled. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly my fucking point. So I've been screaming this for a couple of years, at least, if not more. And so, I mean, and Algis just says it, but he doesn't say it directly, right? But what he's saying is that if you change the cosmology from geocentrism to heliocentrism, then you ruin this whole fucking thing. But as long as it's not ruined, it functions as a projection of the imagination, covering the whole material reality, including the subterranean realms of the underworld, and if you could talk about this in Kingsley's kind of terms, or you could talk about it in Tibetan or Buddhist terms, because we also have Sambhogakaya realm, we also have Dharmakaya realm and Nirmanakaya realm. So like we have, 3 realms, and we recognize that 2 of them are invisible, right? And that they're arising from our heart, exactly, which I'm not surprised that we still have that in Tibetan Buddhism because it was untouched, right? And that Avicenna and Corbin also preserve it because they have the essence of the teaching of the Neoplatonic teachings. Anyway, so he's saying not only, he's saying that that how do astrologers transfer this picture of the imagination arising in this way to a post-Descartes heliocentric worldview, that could only be accomplished by a politician. Because the politician knows that you can't tell the truth because everybody's going to say that you're talking about a platter on top of a turtle with cats knocking the planets off of it, or planets knocking us off of it. Now, if you really want to understand the image of what the world looks like instead of the one you've been sold, I could explain that to you. But first, I need to convince you that's even worth listening to, because, or maybe I don't. Maybe what you need to see is actually the image. It's so hard to betray an image that's so fundamental to us, and it's been pounded into our heads like the globe, and this image of NASA cosmology. Like, it's very hard for me to get in there and do anything about that because that is so deep to your fundamental schema of organizing the world. But as fundamental it is, it's also as essential. Okay, and so my point here with this is that we embody the spark. And so how do we change this roast is that we step into the center. And, and so these are some images I drew a long freaking time ago because I've been thinking about this for a long time. So anyway, so this is actually my understanding of cosmology that I got from Kingsley. Like this is heady as fuck. And so I'm not going to go into it super. So this is an image of cosmology as I understand it or drew it. And I presented this in the Magical Worldview, but it's really difficult to talk about in words. So the image, it works really well, but did people understand it? I doubt it. So it was all 3 of these images were stacked together. This is the central circle. This one was above and this one's below. Okay. So here, on the very bottom and at the very top, we have the cosmic fire. Okay. The central pillar of central fire. And that comes up and rises up through the heart. Okay. So that's like the central fire is up underneath, and that wraps around from top to bottom. Okay. So that's why it's only drawn as half circles. And then there are 2 different, there's like a heaven and there's a hell, right? And so there are 2 different sort of ideas of what, sort of these invisible realms beyond the cosmic fire might look like. But in Tartarus or in the underworld, we've got I drew the 5 rivers of the underworld, and I drew the Buddhist poisons in there, just kind of thinking that, jealousy is transformed into all accomplishing wisdom, or that, these sorts of things. So how we could use emotions and our afflictive emotions and transform that, and how that is really water, working with waters, and that those waters are underneath the earth in Tartarus, and that though, but above, like the purification of that results in the manifestation of the gods. And so like, or the heaven realm, or the great perfection, if we were to do it perfectly, so that is there too, so that's the above. In the heavenly realms are those five great mothers, like their seed syllables, and like the Buddhas and angels that appear above the earth, right? So that's if we see it present. But the main point is, here in the very center of our heart is the cosmic fire. And also these worlds collapse into here too. So we're only seeing the physical world, right? And so arising from the physical world, now here we have the wheel of the planetary, like the world soul, so the first thing that's created in the Timaeus is the first wheel, the great perfection. And that spins around this way. And that can always be, it's always there and can be realized at any point. It's always perfect. It's made of all the same. This second thing that's created are the other two wheels, which are the wheels of the world soul, right? And so of the wheels of the world soul, we there are two. And because it gets cut and divided, like it happens in the Timaeus. One of those wheels, however, is the inner wheel, and you can't see it. That's happening on the inside of us. And the our emotions are, it's like Sambhogakaya-ish, down in there. But what other thing we see is the actual outer wheel of being, that what our experience, which is also not exactly real, right? So we're seeing our diluted projection of the experience against the great perfection, or against the wall of the moon cave, right? So and that projection is affected, or the temper or quality of what appears, the cleanliness or dilutedness of what appears, and changes, and that's accomplishing the great perfection, right? And so there could be elements of perfection, or glimpses of the great perfection that come through. And this is like an ing, which an ing is on the outside, and it calls in the perfections that we can see on the outside, but they also are perfect on the inside. You know what I mean? They're on both sides, and so that's interesting. But so I was just kind of basically explaining where I was going with this image, but also to just kind of give the cosmological image that if you have Copernicanism, you have taken the sun, which has its root in you and underneath in the central column of fire, you've taken it, and you've arranged the entire cosmos of arising around its most material aspect. And you're constellating everything around the most material aspect of it. The sun can never go home, it's like a skew. It can't get back in the column, it's over here. And while that was done for a really good reason, I would give it to Giordano Bruno, and I'd say you had to escape that dome. They had established control over that dome. You couldn't put one toe out of line. And so it was better to bust that dome open. I would give them that. And I would also say, however, that the thought experiment of it has been completely and really beneficial, right? We got like so much out of modern science by moving our constellation to the material aspect of the sun. How do we see God in this world? Well, sheesh Louise, we see that in modern medicine, don't we? Like other things, like I would say, my computer, like that's great. I like it. So I'm glad we did that. But at the same time, that is the most material aspect of the sun. And the sun, God can't get back in the column to go home inside of you, to up into the deep, into the underworld. And so it's a skew. And we also could take our focus and put it on Venus and rotate everything around Venus. Like that's a thought experiment. And maybe we should do that, or maybe we should choose Mercury and get super wordy and smart. Or, who knows what we would come up with. I really don't think we should do any of that, to be honest. But maybe just as a thought experiment, maybe we should. But as far as the spiritual truths of the reality, we need to get back to the geocentric perspective, because this was because it gives us our sovereignty back. So the next thing that I wanted to look at here. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about the central fire. Okay. And I want to talk to you about why, is this the birth of it? No, this is why, this is what happened. This is why they got why geocentrism became a thing. I mean, heliocentrism became a thing. Okay, this is what happened. It comes in with Philolaus. Okay, and so this guy Philolaus is a Greek thinker, right? Greek philosopher. He's in like the Pythagorean tradition. He's right in the vein. Okay, he gets it. But he starts thinking about this teaching from Homer that describes the cosmology, which was the going understanding, which was that Tartarus, the fiery pit of the underworld, the central fire, is as far below Hades as heaven is above earth. Okay? So it's like setting up this stack, right? So that this is a quote from Kingsley that implies that the following cosmic arrangement, starting from above: heaven, earth, Hades, and Tartarus. Okay. So basically, what Kingsley says is that eventually, people start thinking about this, Philolaus namely, and in general. And although it's super genius of him, right? Like he's not discounting the brilliance and creativity of what Philolaus came up with or why, but he is saying it's wrong, at least according to Empedocles and the teachers that Kingsley, is trying to redirect us back to in those teachings of non-duality. And so what Philolaus is thinking, though, is that here's the earth and all of this is, and the hearth, and all of this is revolving around us, so there's too much space. Here's Hades, here's Tartarus. Well, and where the central hearth is somewhere in between this and what arises on the earth. And so everything's revolving around that. Well, that's too much space. And then he starts thinking, where are the planets in that scheme? Because he encounters the teachings of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And so Kingsley uses a very word that's considered pedantic and rude anymore, orientalizing. And but he uses it with full consciousness and calls Philolaus an orientalizer. And he says that Philolaus orientalized the Egyptian teachings and cosmology because he encountered this schema of all these planets and he didn't know where to put them in the cosmology. And he started thinking, well, honestly, if it works like, that everything's revolving around the earth, then possibly is hell revolving around earth? And like, where do these planets fit and all of this? And so he dislodged the earth from the center because of these gaps of space. And if you wanted to read it way more eloquently, you could do so in Ancient Philosophy, Mystery, Magic, or you could pause this and possibly read the quotes which I pulled out. But that is the central argument that Kingsley makes, and I was not wrong to bring him forward as my champion for geocentrism and the magical worldview based on his understanding of Philolaus. And he, so basically that is what's being said, is that Philolaus orientalized cosmology based and made it all askew. He misunderstood Homer. He misread that and took the teaching in a different direction after that. And that, unfortunately, that resulted in the first spark of heliocentrism. So then we have, now this is something that came to me recently on the Mercury conjunct the Sun transit. There was a Cazimi in Leo. And this hit me like a ton of bricks that day. And I went back to the Kingsley book and I was reading, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. I'm right. You're right. Whoever just told me that. And so I think it's interesting that it was the Cazimi in Leo, because I'm talking about the birth of the sun, and the sun rules Leo, and Mercury like kind of tells the story of the sun or gives the sun words. And so, if you're not familiar with this story, it's really an interesting one. And Kingsley, you're not really sure what he's doing to you when you're reading this book. You think something else is happening, and then you get to the end, and then you sleep on it for a day, and then you realize, wow, he's given me a ton of images. And these images are really where it's at. So he's described the birth of the sun in this passage. And so he's talking about how the cosmic fire builds up in the underworld, and it's building up to such a degree that it finally tips, and it tips over, and it funnels down the central column and lights up in the bulb. And that is how we got the sun. Right? It's like this, and that's how we got the inversion too. So I'll just read it because I think it's probably the best thing. So the story of the birth of the sun is told by Empedocles. Empedocles' account of what happened at the start of our world. He described how the aether, the first element to separate out from the primordial chaotic mass. Now, I understand this aether to be pregnant with potential, right? It's like the emptiness pregnant with potential, the bomb syllable or the black Buddha Dakini, and like everything she rules is that aether. So so the aether separated out from the primal chaotic mass, and then came fire, the heavier of the yet more volatile, and it ran up the aether and spread through it, creating a blazy, fiery hemisphere. But that's not the end of the matter. The next, the fire reacted with the aether, glazing and crystallizing it and creating the brilliant crystalline heaven, which lights up in the sky, right? And so small pockets of fire became trapped in this crystallized aether, becoming what we now perceive as the fixed stars. So that'll be the planets too. And then the most crucial event of all occurred. So much fire at the upper boundary of the cosmos made the universe top heavy, and the fire started to weigh down and tilted the universe and the celestial pole in the process. And as it slid down the circular boundary of the universe, it accumulated into one of the concentrated body of fire, our familiar sun, SUN. The creation of the planets and the moon was also described as part of this cosmic transformation. What had been the hemisphere of fire, what is the hemisphere of fire no longer? Instead, it was embodied above in the all-orbiting sun. Okay, so basically what he's describing is this well up or flow of fire that happens, and then how it tips over and we see it on the outside, or we see it as the sun. Now, he also describes, I love, this is my favorite, and I think about this in my meditation a lot. And he says that in Empedocles' poetry, he describes the creation process that gave rise to the ancestors of mankind. Fire, pushing up from the depths of the earth, raised the benighted shoots of humanity and then left them still sexually undifferentiated on the earth's surface as it rushed to the heavens to join the fire that was accumulating there. So in other words, like our internal fire also reaches towards this sun that we see in the huge body of the sun is greater than us, right? Like it's bigger than just one little benighted shoot of humanity. Yet all benighted shoots of humanity are equally undifferentiated and part of this same solar energy. But it shows like us rising up and reaching towards that sun as the material sun manifests, right? So it happens. Empedocles is not only stating that the fire which eventually rose up to become the sun had its origin in the bowels of the earth, but also implying that this source of daylight and illumination derives ultimately from the dark depths of the underworld. Right. So he's saying that, that the sun at midnight, basically. And you can't get the sun at midnight with heliocentrism, because there is you can't get what is that? Ping, the balls where you do like the arcade and it's like slot balls or something. I can't think of, not ping pong art, but like this, but you can't get the ball back into the right place to go back into the place in order to get back in the column to shoot back out with heliocentrism. It's impossible. There is no way. Maybe there is a way. Maybe you'll tell me. But according to what I'm saying, and according to what Empedocles taught and others taught, there isn't. I don't see the holistic nature of the inner outer world as it manifests in heliocentrism. I don't see that. So how do you get on the throne? And so so again, this presentation is another make love not war, make art not war sort of thing. And I have written a zine called The Magical Worldview, which like kind of begins to describe a lot of this, and is really, it's a stellar little piece for an amateur fisherman, I believe. And so I was super excited to read this passage in this new book, and to see that Algis also comes out as a champion for the magical worldview. he's ultimately saying, or I'm ultimately saying, that in order to accomplish the magical worldview, like to get that power and to get in the seat of the chariot of the Merkaba, and to have control of those two reins and wheels, and to be able to accomplish this thing we call the to will, which ultimately results in the transfiguration, and how, the round comes around again, we pin it down, and then it moves up in the vertical direction. And how do you get in on this process? How do you start doing this? My argument is that you don't do it without geocentrism. And, we can see that that's true, because all of astrology is already based on geocentrism. I mean, there's heliocentric astrology, and I'm not going to discount like Michael Erlewine or like the realizations he came to through heliocentric astrology. Still true. We can still move out and put our focus there and look at the world from there. Absolutely possible. We could also move it to Venus. Let's hear Venus astrology. You know what I mean? But as far as accomplishing the transfiguration, we are humans. We are on the earth, and that horizontal plane of inertia arises from our heart. We are hung on the cross. It's just the way the whole system works. And so, I've been screaming it for a long time, saying that you don't get the magical worldview. You don't affect the transfiguration without stepping into the magical worldview and embodying it fully. And we know that thought follows belief, and that like reality follows thought. And so without belief, if you're not believing what you're thinking, if you're not believing it, then you're not going to be able to pull it off. Like, it's not going to show up for you if you don't believe it. So you actually have to fully step into the geocentric view. And I would argue, with thanks to Algis and helping me to clarify this, that I would argue that you got to step into 3 changes that came in the schism of the Renaissance. One, this idea of a Cartesian divide between self and world, and that's much more permeable than that. Like, and that we live in an animate, like step back into animism. 2, that there is no divide in your magic. There is not philosophical and practical magic, and that philosophical magic on its own is not enough to get you there. You actually have to practice. It's like to say that I was reading books on Buddhism, but I never sat down to meditate. Am I going to accomplish enlightenment? No, you actually have to practice. So there's no distinction in magic as far as actually accomplishing theurgy and salvation. So second thing. So first we have the Cartesian divide between self and world, and actually being a non-dual world. 2, you have no division in your magic. And 3, you have a stepping back from Copernicanism and a stepping back into the heliocentric worldview that understands the cosmos and our place in it, and how it arises through us by the liminal threshold in our heart. The magical worldview. Okay, so I hope y'all, thanks for sticking with me. I hope some of that made sense. I hope there's someone in the world who it made sense to, and who's interested in it, so that I didn't waste my breath and that this was worth doing. But anyway, I love you guys. And I'm, as far as in my own personal world, I'm starting a new job on Monday. And if I were talking about the astrology, you can look on maybe my Facebook. I'm probably the most active there. And I talk about Aries, and I talk about Saturn and Neptune and Aries. And I talk a lot about how you better get your poop in a scoop and be self-sufficient, because regardless of what we want the world to look like in the next 14 years, what the world is going to look like, etc. So yeah, taking my own advice, I have gotten a really, really great opportunity and a new job to do some accounting for a religious organization. It's a great job. And so I'm going to go be doing that. So maybe look for more art from me. Although I'm not the greatest drawer, I do have fun doing drawings. So I'll be producing more art. I'll still be doing that, and I'll still be doing, some astrology, because I definitely do astrology every day for myself. And so yeah, I may be bringing out something more like that. And my intention is to try to write another zine once I can find the voice of who the heck I'm talking to here. Because I honestly don't see y'all. I don't see it. I see a couple of people, but I already tell those people these things, so I didn't need to make a video about it. So I don't see y'all. I don't know who you are. I don't know who's still there there with me and is interested in this material and can follow what I'm saying. But I know that there are some of you, and I can remember some of you, and I know some of you are out there, but and I miss you. Yeah, we should, this too shall pass. But anyway, once I find the voice, and I'm gonna try to write another zine that's gonna be about sort of about this material. I don't want to give it away because I don't want anyone else to write my book. Okay, love you guys. Thanks for being here. Praying for all of you. And I'm praying for the world and for us, and love you guys. And yeah, hope to see you again another day soon. Bye.